For over 2 centuries, a single political entity dominated northern and central India. Between the 4th and 5th centuries CE, the Gupta Empire unified a massive stretch of the subcontinent under one centralized banner. The empire used this stability to foster an explosion of intellectual progress. Scholars like Aryabhata were calculating the length of a solar year and proposing that the Earth rotated on its axis, centuries before those ideas reached Europe. We can still see the physical proof of their engineering capabilities today. This is the Iron Pillar of Delhi. For 1,600 years, it has stood in the open air without rusting, a feat of advanced metallurgy that scientists are still struggling to perfectly replicate. That kind of scientific mastery matched their artistic output. Inside the Ajanta caves, you can see how the wealth generated by a highly organized government paid for incredibly complex stone architecture and vibrant paintings. The Gupta state stood as an architectural masterpiece of political organization. It was a massive, load-bearing structure of centralized authority that defined the ancient Indian world. But no structure lasts forever. How does an empire that achieved this level of wealth and stability eventually fracture and fall apart? Massive political entities rarely collapse from a single blow. Instead, they give way under the weight of compounding structural failures. To understand what happened to the Guptas, we have to look for these specific pressure points that stressed the empire's borders, the internal cracks that split its foundation, and the surprising new societies built from the rubble. By the 6th century CE, the first major stress fractures appeared along the empire's northwestern borders. A fierce nomadic group from Central Asia, known as the Huna tribe, began arriving at the edges of Gupta territory. This map shows the northern frontier of the Gupta Empire. The Hunas launched repeated incursions that battered against the empire's outer defenses. To hold the line, the capital diverted its soldiers and, crucially, its wealth away from the center, funneling everything toward the north. Fighting a perpetual border war is incredibly expensive. Over time, the cost of holding off the Hunas drained the royal treasury, hollowing out the empire's resources. By pouring all their strength into defending the roof of their empire, the Guptas left their internal walls dangerously weak. To see where those walls gave out, we have to look inward. Generations earlier, the great emperor Samudragupta expanded the empire by allowing defeated kings to keep their thrones as long as they paid tribute, a policy represented by gold coins minted in his image. An indirect system of rule has a fatal flaw. It relies entirely on the threat of force. Local kings only pay tribute if the central authority is strong enough to command fear. With the Gupta capital distracted and nearly bankrupt from fighting the Hunas, that fear evaporated. Ambitious provincial governors and tributary kings realized they no longer needed to send their taxes to a weakened emperor, and they began claiming independence. The Gupta state ultimately collapsed because it was caught in a vice. While the external battering ram struck from the north, the internal foundation fractured as regional leaders simply walked away. As central authority dissolved, the once unified map of the subcontinent shattered. This created a massive political vacuum across India. But nature abhors a vacuum. The end of Gupta rule didn't plunge the subcontinent into chaos or darkness. Instead, the sudden lack of a dominant superpower triggered an explosion of aggressive new political and cultural growth. The death of the empire triggered the birth of a highly competitive, decentralized landscape where new regional builders rushed in to stake their claim. Down in the southern subcontinent, the shifting political tides created an opening for the Pallava dynasty. As the older powers declined, the Pallavas rapidly consolidated territory across present-day Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. They used this newly acquired power to fund their own cultural golden age, centered in their capital of Kanchipuram. Structures like the Kailasanathar temple proved the immense architectural and artistic might the Pallavas commanded. Kanchipuram also evolved far beyond its military capabilities. It became a premier intellectual hub, establishing specialized centers of learning, known as Ghatikas, that rivaled the older universities of the north. Meanwhile, thousands of miles to the northeast, an entirely different narrative was unfolding. This is the remote, highly distinct geography of the Brahmaputra Valley. Here, the Kamarupa kingdom, ruled by the Varman dynasty, seized the opportunity created by the power vacuum. They aggressively expanded their borders, transforming the valley into a thriving, independent cultural center of its own. These kingdoms proved that the fragments of the old empire were not lost. They were successfully repurposed to build dynamic, distinct regional masterpieces. Look at the new map of the Indian subcontinent by the 7th century. It is no longer dominated by a single monolithic giant. Instead, it sparkles with a wide network of distinct, vibrant cultural centers. When we look at history, we tend to view the fall of a massive centralized structure as a failure, but in many ways it is a necessary phase in historical evolution. The decline of a great empire isn't always a tragedy. Often it is the exact mechanism that allows a more diverse, decentralized, and culturally rich future to bloom.